I wish I could record myself riding my bike, because I feel like every thought I've ever had in my life comes across while I'm riding to work.
I feel like I have a lot of shower thoughts, but I don't ride it in a bike on a bike, so
You don't ride a bike in the shower.
no, just in general, you know what I mean. That'd be really weird in the shower. First of all, getting it in there would be such a pain in the ass.
Oh, imagine trying to explain to your roommate, and you could be like, "This is just how I shower."
Like, how do you shower? You don't have this giant metal thing that's like because I imagine it in my head that like the front wheel would have to be perpendicular to the rest of the bike just to fit, 'cause it would be too long. And it would just be like resting on the top. It would trap you in this little sliver corner. That just sounds awful. It sounds terrible.
You should make him sound like an idiot when you get on. Like, why don't you do this?
Yeah, you should definitely have a dedicated shower bike. What's wrong with you?
Speaking of, are you... Okay, this isn't a question. We're gonna ride to your work when the spring comes around, and I don't want to hear any shit about how it's painful to ride around there. We're gonna do it.
I think about this often. Not the ride with you. Just when I drive, I'm like, I live really close to where I work, so maybe you should be riding your bike. Of course, it's really cold now, and I can tell you, no chance. Just no. Unless, like, the ride ends up being easier than I think it is. Because wait till you see how this is set up. It takes like 15 minutes to get to my job sometimes, and I'm only 3 miles away because of this stretch. And it also, like, is on a general incline until you get to a point where it's a pretty big hill, but then you're crossing over like a major exit interchange.
Okay, so here's the problem with any suggestions to somebody that they ride to work. They automatically assume that they're going to take the exact same way they drive, and that's almost never the case. What's that?
So that's exactly what I was thinking.
And I mean, that's fair. It's not stupid or anything. It's just the natural way that you've gone there every day. But most of the time you're allotted certain privileges when you ride a bike, where you're allowed to ride on bike paths and sidewalks. Oh, so you're looking up directions now?
I sure am, because I want to see.
Yeah, you got options.
I want to see what these options are, because where this place is located, it's like you have to go uphill like every way, I think. This is what I'm talking about. There's that interchange.
No, fuck that. Anything where there's entrances to a freeway, I try to avoid.
So that's not that bad. This route might actually be pretty pleasant. This is all like downhill. Coming back home would be kind of a bitch.
190 feet over the course of it. I mean, it's all kind of sudden.
Derick, look at that.
What?
Stupid hills. That's a hill.
That's like 30 feet.
Derick, I don't like climbing hills at all. When we would go bike riding, every hill, like, I would always be thinking, I was like, you are enjoying this. Remember this when you're riding on that hill. Like, this is fun. You're also exercising. It's cool. But you would take the hills like it was just a fun time. And I'm like, can I make this hill? Am I going to make this hill? When am I going to end up falling off this bike? I feel like I would end up just like walking up that hill and adding like 5 minutes to my ride every single time.
I mean, it's not easy because I do it every day or anything. It's mostly because I'm superhuman.
See, that's a consideration that you need to keep in mind, that I am not superhuman.
I'm being sarcastic. You could do
I
this
know,
every day.
Derick. How was I gonna play into your stupid joke?
You're better at me than sounding serious then. Yeah, that doesn't look that bad. That part right there might suck, and that's pretty slow.
Yeah, and it's also around a curve.
It's not like a sharp turn or anything.
Derick, you are so ridiculous.
Why?
You're judgy. You're a judgy bike rider.
No, I'm not judgy. This is bullshit.
I know, I really shouldn't even do that, because you are pretty accepting and you just want people to ride bikes.
Yeah. And they don't even have to buy special stuff to do it.
Yeah, you do, to buy a bike.
Well, besides that.
That's like a big part of it, and like a bike that fits you is hard to find.
Yeah.
What I think I would do is I would ride to this parking lot and then just ride through the grass over here, which is like a douche thing to do, I guess.
What are we looking at here? Where?
I'm looking at the metro.
Oh, fuck riding through parking lots. I would never do that.
Really? You just ride where they tell you to ride?
Parking lots are awful. They're little death traps. Like, they're not actually going to hurt you because they're all slow, but still, people are just retarded in parking lots.
Though, the one thing that I would have to do that adds time is where the metro is a tunnel that goes under the tracks. But like it exits out here, but you have to like get off your bike and walk it. You can't just ride through there. But that would easily add like 5 minutes just of like dismounting and walking.
I'm going to call your bluff here. I'm going to say that's an additional 2 minutes. Walking doesn't take that long.
It takes me forever.
Unless you walk on your hands and knees, then I'm pretty sure you could do that whole 100-foot stretch.
I don't know, man. I think you're right, actually. And I really can't argue. That sounds totally reasonable. I wonder where I would store my bike.
I mean, if nothing else, these trees right here are probably fine. But yeah,
Yeah.
or you could just lock it up to itself and push it up against the building, and who gives a shit?
I do, because I want to get home.
Yeah, nobody's gonna take your bike though. That's what I mean. This is the whole point of this conversation is like, bike thieves don't come here.
We are just thinking this. We don't know this for sure. We should look up theft in this area.
How about I pay you if your bike gets stolen? I'll be your insurance.
Are you gonna pay me the worth of this bike, or you're gonna buy me a new bike? Because
That's a
this
good
bike is probably
question.
worth like $20 now.
Damn it, Mar, you're not supposed to ask the value of the bike.
Oh, I gotta ask that question because my compensation could be like pennies at this point, like pennies on the dollar that I bought it for.
I'll give you a couple $100.
For real? That would be amazing. I'll totally take that deal. I'll steal it. I'm gonna steal it myself. I'm just gonna report it stolen.
I wouldn't support you if you like lied with your smiling ass face, saying it got stolen when it didn't. I feel like you seem to be preparing a lot for Christmas, and I'm wondering if you're enjoying Christmas or if you're doing this purely out of grudging necessity.
Obligation. Okay, so I don't know. I have to like think about gifts in a way I really hadn't had to before. Like I would get gifts for like my family, but it was like a pretty small list. I don't know. I already have a hard time like buying gifts anyway. And then like on top of that, it's always compounded by like I find Christmas to be this deadline for supposed joyous gift giving, but it's so stressful to make sure your gifts get chosen and delivered and like I don't know, just like having everything ready to go for Christmas. I hate it actually. I hate the whole deadline thing. I'm much more into like doing nice things or getting things over time, but like this concentrated thing where like expectations are weird and I think I'm moving beyond Christmas. Most of the time I think of it as like an atheist. I don't celebrate Christmas in like the traditional way, I guess. I just do it as like a family gift giving thing, like time to spend time with family.
Oh, that's weird.
Because you also get like a national day off, like which I think is insane that it's a federal holiday. I mean, I enjoyed it as a child, but you just like pour gifts on a kid. They have no concept of really what you're doing. There's no appreciation there. Like they don't even know who's giving them the gifts for like the first 7 years of their life. They think it's a magical man who is really spying on them from the North Pole, which is really pedophilic and gross.
Hey, nobody said anything about Santa touching kids, all right? That's not part of the story.
Well, it's voyeuristic then of children. I feel like that still falls in there. I feel like I could go into like so many different facets that like just kind of annoy me. It's coming together to where I want to be like, why are we even doing
Yeah,
this?
no, I picked up that attitude. It was just hinted in your statement there. You have a funny way of describing totally normal things as this odd and unusual experience that you have. Like, oh, unlike every other family in America, we celebrate it as in we give gifts to each other and hang out as a family. Like, what do you expect everybody else is doing? Saying prayers to Santa? Like,
I know. But like I think the way I started saying stuff like that when I was younger, I don't know, I was a more expressive atheist at the time in my early
oh
20s,
god.
and it was weird to me to celebrate. It still is, you know, it's like at this point it's like who cares anymore, but celebrating like Christian holidays in such a big way. It's also like at the height of Christmas is about Jesus or about Christ. I guess leave Christ in Christmas is the phrase or whatever. And I feel like some people would ask me like, "Oh, why do you celebrate Christmas?" And I'd be like, "Well, because one, you get a paid day off. Why would you spend it with like family?"
Yeah, it's a good time.
So I don't know. I think it's a holdover from my having to discuss. It's weird to them for atheists to do stuff. So people would ask me questions like that. So I always wanted to have an answer.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of atheists celebrate this though. Like the only reason I can expect that somebody was asking you why you do all these things is because you were such an expressive atheist. Like if you were constantly denouncing God in any celebrations, then people would be like, "Oh, well, why are you doing this?"
I mean, I was expressive, but I wasn't like mean. I was never trying to convert anybody because I realized it's not really something you can do. We can talk about it, but it's a personal decision. So Some people took it badly. Like, I figured it out when I was probably, I'm going to say, as late as 11. But I didn't really tell anybody until I was closer. I think I was like 18. Some people reacted badly. I think they would felt personally threatened. Like, I was, like, judging them for believing in something other than just saying, like, no, I don't agree with you.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not like I was, like, judging them. It was one area where I tried to, like, never be a jerk because that never works out. People already distrust atheists. We're like one of the most distrusted groups in America. It's really like up there. People do not think that they would vote for like an atheist president. It automatically makes people distrust them. And being a woman who's an atheist, it makes people uncomfortable when other people do make decisions that are contrary to theirs.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to agree with there is anytime you choose something that is in stark contrast to how somebody else lives, it automatically comes across as a judgment when you explain it. Like whether
Yeah.
you're a vegetarian or
You exercise.
you ride bikes or eat healthy or you're vegan or anything like that. So
Any like personal decision that's at odds, especially really if it has a benefit to the person's life. Like they're like, I mean, I've never been a vegan, but like I switched to being a vegan and I feel great.
yeah,
Like the other person's like, well, they have to like make excuses about like why they wouldn't be able to be a vegan or they feel great and they're not a vegan. It's just like, oh my God. I don't know. People can't handle it.
yeah. My go-to response is sarcasm whenever people would respond to Amanda's vegetarianism with, I could never stop eating meat. I'm like, oh, yeah, I've heard that's physically impossible for some people. I get that exaggerated and over-the-top responses are kind of just like safe, even if they're not necessarily accurate or funny or cool.
And I think a lot of it is people are like thrown out of their comfort zone without any forewarning, I guess. So they immediately just defend. It's defend, defend, defend.
Like there are things people can say that make me respond in a similar way. People who felt very strongly about something, like it's intimidating that they have such conviction about anything in their life, as opposed to most people who are just kind of like afraid to commit for being called out or judged for it. And so they stay in the middle and don't let a lot of people see what they are thinking or how deeply they care about it. Because you can't really be judged for not caring that much.
Before, I guess I cared a lot more. Now it's just, I just realize it doesn't matter. No one really cares what people think. So it doesn't really matter. So like I've stopped being so, I guess, vehement. I'm like super intense about it. I'm definitely not as up on stuff, but that's kind of laziness about like just not reading really as much as I used to. I find that I am no longer knowledgeable enough to really speak on stuff. So I don't know, like I don't have a mind for stats.
I don't know that you need stats all that much to talk to people. I think you're a good listener and you can take advantage of that to discuss any topic. Data doesn't matter anyway. Nobody hears stats and goes, oh, well, that changed my mind.
I do. Numbers can tell you things.
I mean, yeah, they can tell you things, but there's still, like, most of what changes people's minds is experience and emotion. And so you can convey more of your ideas using their experience and their emotion more than you can anything else. Like, every time I've talked to some people who I disagree with, there's a consistent person I have in mind. But every time we do discuss things, I typically am able to convince them that whatever their hatred is unfounded. And it's not through attacking their argument and throwing all this data in their face, but just kind of being like, yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I know why you think that way, but you're missing some information. And not only that, but have you thought about this same thing from the perspective of the people you are attacking? Using that sort of thing, using perspective, because a lot of people don't take that. If you're racist, you're not thinking about what the other race thinks about. You've probably already dehumanized them and seen them as objects anyway.
I think that's one of the things that, I mean, it's not like exclusive to me, but like that's one of the things where I think I finally started changing in the way I thought was when I think it's called Sonder, like thinking of other people. I think you just realize stuff as you get older, where you start like having these revelations that like not everything's about you, really at all. People are only really worried about like their own lives, and that's okay because that's all you're doing. You know what I mean? I will make the exception for like a lot of people who have kids. It's almost inclusive as part of yourself.
You're protecting your nuclear family or your genetics at the very least. If you wanted to be all what do they call that? David Hawkins. I can't remember.
Stephen Hawking?
No, there was
I was gonna say David Hawking is Hawkins is like way off from Stephen Hawking, and I was going to be really
It's his
embarrassed.
annoying brother who's not disabled. Shit, The Selfish Gene.
Oh, Richard Dawkins?
Yeah, Richard Dawkins. There we go. It's another awe.
Yeah.
It's funny, if you go back to that book, he's got this it's a prologue or a foreword, and he talks about all the responses that people have to that book. And did you ever read the book, The Selfish Gene?
No.
Okay, so it's a semi-terrible book, but it was pretty revelatory for its time. It's one of those things like The Fellowship of the Ring. Like, it was terrible compared to now, but it was useful at the time. So The Selfish Gene just talks about how this theory that everything humans do and everything kind of leads back to genes protecting themselves. And so he sort of describes it as this metaphorical selfish gene. Like, he's not really ascribing emotion to it. But throughout the book, it comes across that way. And especially if you're a person who empathizes really well, then you're reading this book and seeing basically there's no meaning to life other than procreating, and it's really sad and depressing. And so he got a lot of responses to that book back in the 80s, and he's put it in the later books trying to, like, debate or argue against that idea. That's not what he meant. But people kind of took it that way anyway.
Okay, so you said a couple of things. For one, I'm just going to make a side note. That's very interesting that people were mad about the life being only about procreating, because that's totally what I believe. Obviously, I don't have children. I don't think it's like the only thing you can do with life, but really the literal purpose of life, all life, is just to pass your genes on to the next generation. That's literally the only reason we're all here. However, we are humans, so we end up developing like the ability to think, so it kind of throws a wrench into it because we can actually think about it now.
Yeah.
But that is really what life is. I'm not saying it's the meaning of life, but I do think it's the purpose of life. There is no life out there that isn't seeking to reproduce itself. There's none. Because it would be dead already. We wouldn't even know about it anymore. I mean, okay. So I know we want life to be more about more just having kids, but I mean, like, can't we all agree that that is the reason we're here? There's different ways you can make your experience of being alive better, but the ultimate purpose is to reproduce, in our instance, sexually with other partners, and then look to have a baby. If you wouldn't have the biological urge, for one, either you wouldn't have the kid or you would eat the kid after it was born, because we're all animals, and that's what animals do sometimes.
Yeah, but hold on a sec. Before you go on and on about how we should eat our children,
I say we should.
I just want to say, if people were okay with this idea, then religion would not be a thing.
I don't feel bad about this stuff when I think about it. It's like a realism.
Yeah.
And I like that about this stuff. I think it's interesting to think about. It doesn't make me feel bad about being a human. It makes me feel good about existing at all.
Initially, it makes a lot of people feel terrible because they feel like their life should be more than that, which is why we've ascribed words like soul and God and like universe with this religious sort of connotation to it, because we expect life to be more about more than ourselves and more than just procreation. And I think maybe science has kind of opened us up to this idea that there's a sort of, not spiritual, but for lack of a better word, something beautiful about just being here ourselves. We can make something amazing together, and this is what life is about now because we've decided it is. And I think that can be great, but it's only after, tens of thousands of years and that I can say this. And before that, it was just like death, cholera, and endless work.
Yeah, it was really terrible. We live in a pretty special time. Sometimes I think about what's amazing to me is that I exist. Like, what made it so that I am aware of what is happening? Like, I think that is enough. I don't know if it attains a religious or spiritual quality, but sometimes it does. Like, when I think about, like, how big the universe is and how unlikely it is that I would exist, like, this planet would exist. But just because God didn't make it happen doesn't mean it's not fucking amazing that it did. And then that I get to be one of the humans that can, like, think about things. I'm not even, like, a dumb human, too. I get to be, like, not a dumb person. That, to me, makes me feel like there's a lot of meaning. It's not wasted because it doesn't go on for infinity. And not even that, we happen to exist in a very small percentage even of the time that humans even existed. And look how we're talking through wires right now with the help of the internet. I get to tool around with my cat and be like a super sloth whenever I want because I happen to be born in a time when, one, women aren't being tortured, and two, we have technology and enough money in this country to like have grown enough that like we actually get to live this life. What more do you want? What do you want, people? What is heaven then? It also makes me feel better about global warming because this planet's going to be fine. Life will find a way.
Yeah, some life will
Life
find
will
a
find
way.
a way. It'll just be different. It just won't be humans. It'll be something else that's cool or scary, really scary, but we won't know about it, so it doesn't really matter.
It's funny is like even 100 years ago, like heaven would have looked drastically different from what it would look like now. But also, the biggest thing is like no matter what you expect to be in heaven, whether it's virgins or like huge TVs or something, or just being close to God, if you're hoping to go to heaven and it's perfect, what experience in your life have you ever been happy with for an unlimited amount of time where you're happy consistently and you don't find some problem with it? Like you were just saying, we live in an amazing time, and yet you can still find people that are losing their shit over little stuff, whether it's Netflix buffering or sitting in traffic or being out of power for 15 minutes or an hour.
You can be happy, but like, what's the next thing you can have? You know? It makes me always think of like Hugh Grant. He married Elizabeth Hurley.
Yeah.
And then he like went trolling for prostitutes. And then people always be like, I don't understand why Hugh Grant would do that. He has Elizabeth Hurley at home. She's like one of the most beautiful, sexiest women in the world. Why would you cheat on that? Because it's not about that. It doesn't matter how great what you have is at home. It gets old. It's not enough.
Not to get all Dr. Phil on this, but it has more to do with being happy with yourself than the person you're with. Like, it doesn't matter if you're with a model or something. And not only that, there's a common guy saying that it doesn't matter how hot she is, there's some guy out there that's tired of fucking her.
I have heard that phrase before.
It's an extremely crude statement, but it's kind of also, like, it's telling.
Oh, that was something else that you said before that I had to write down so I didn't forget about it.
I'm glad you did.
You were talking about how the selfish gene, it was the Fellowship of the Rings, the first Lord of the Rings book, how it is terrible but useful at the time. I was struck by that because how was that boring book ever useful for the time period it came out in? I read all these books, all the Lord of the Rings books.
Yeah.
The first one, I mean, it took me a year of on and off reading because I just couldn't get into it. I kept putting it down because I was like, this is killing me. I don't even remember most of the parts in that book anymore because I feel like I've forgotten a lot of it. But I remember, and I know I brought this up to you before, Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
What the fuck, man? Well, I know it was a story he told his children and he wanted to throw the story in there because it was like, for my kids. But I remember reading it and I was like, what does this have anything to do with anything? Is this actually part of the story? Am I going to have to remember this happening later on? And of course, after 3 books, nary a mention. It never happens again. He never mentions this fucking Tom Bombadil. He doesn't even come out in the end of the story like to have any meaning. He was just like a character that they just happened to pass through his magical realm for.
Well, to be fair, the entire book was a waste of your life.
I mean, are you talking about reading books in general as a waste of my life, or just that book is not a good book?
If you're not getting anything out of it, you're not enjoying it or taking any sort of lesson or learning Elvish, then I don't know what exactly you're getting out of it anyway.
It was part of my Atlas Shrugged time in my life where I was just reading books just to read them. Though I did just watch a thing, like John Green and his brother have Vlogbrothers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which video this was, but they were mentioning like, what book would you take if you were gonna be stranded on a desert island? And Hank said, oh, well, you're taking the book with you so that no one else will ever have to suffer from reading it again. And it was Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. And I just laughed. It's not Atlas Shrugged, but it was an Ayn Rand book. And I was just like, that's exactly what I want to do with the other book, is just free people from the burden of its existence.
I think maybe as an alternative to banning books, people should give them away for free and then mandate that you read them so that they go away forever.
I can't believe I just propounded or like went in support of banning a book.
You just said take it away out of existence. That's different from banning. Banning doesn't remove it from existence. It just draws all this unnecessary attention to it. So, like, To Kill a Mockingbird, the fact that it's been mandated in schools has basically ruined it, despite the fact that it's this beautiful, fantastic fucking book.
Yeah.
But by making a bunch of 5th graders read it, they've just ruined it. Nobody likes it.
I read it as an adult, finally. It was just a school book, and I didn't really get like a whole lot out of it until I read it. I read it as an adult like 2 years ago. And I was like, oh man, this is actually a really good book. And you totally don't get it because you're a kid when you're reading it.
Yeah, and some adult is saying you have to read this, all 240 pages or whatever, which to you feels like this monumental amount.
This is what I came to the conclusion of with books they make you read in school. They want you to read all of these like quote unquote classics, but these books were written for adults.
Yeah.
Some books you can read when you're a kid and like you have enough perspective for you to get meaning out of it. But most of those books, I feel like if you read them again as adults, you'd be like, oh my God, this is what this means. If it's just about saying like we're making our kids educated in the classics, like for one, it doesn't teach people to enjoy reading. It actually teaches them to hate reading. But two, they're not age appropriate a lot of times. You wouldn't necessarily give a book that you would give a graduate student in terms of like advanced themes to like, I don't know, a high schooler. You just don't have enough life experience to really be able to find the deep themes in books that they wanted you to. It's so much easier when you're older, and they're actually enjoyable when you're older.
Yeah.
It's not a chore to read this thing that you can't really understand anymore, like you're actually reading and you're like, this is pretty good. Pretty good style too. You write for adults. That makes sense.
And the funny thing is, the fact that they're pushing these classics, it feels like the reverse of what they should be doing. So all art follows other art. It incorporates it into what you're building. Okay, so if I'm an artist and I'm drawing, I'm going to incorporate my own life experience, which is going to include older art forms. And so the same thing happens with books. New books come out, whether they're for adults or kids, and they incorporate elements of the classics because despite the fact that humans have been writing for thousands of years, we don't really have that many stories. And so if you go and read a Goosebumps book, they're probably going to draw some elements from like Moby Dick or something, like just little bits and pieces and similar elements that are shared from books long before that. And so trying to force people to read these, I guess, elemental books that are supposed to be the origin of certain great ideas in our generation is kind of pointless because there's already been books written long after that that incorporate all of those same ideas. And not to mention, they're going to be far more readable. Like finding a Goosebumps book that incorporates little bits and pieces of a classic is going to be far more useful to a fifth grader than making them read To Kill a Mockingbird. Everyone since that book has been incorporating elements about anti-racism and being supportive of your fellow man. You don't have to read that book to get that. It's not the only book with that element in there.
I can see why the people who develop like educational programs would want the basic stuff to be in there so you can actually see where these other more contemporary things draw from.
Sure.
But I don't, in my own experience, I didn't even think about that till now, and I'm 32. I didn't think about that when I was in school, if that's what their goal was. I mean, if that was their goal, to be like, this is where people first started maybe not being racist assholes with Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
My brother didn't like reading when I was a kid, but I loved reading. But it was because I would go to this library and like find things that I wanted to read. But I didn't like reading for school because it was boring and it felt like a chore.
This next portion is actually us discussing The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. We just forgot to mention that.
I actually finished the book. That's pretty unusual, right?
That is unusual, and I'm glad you did. I'm sad you didn't like it that much.
So at the end of the book, I was really into it, but then I started noticing the book was rapidly coming to a close. He hadn't gone into like half the shit that I wanted to hear about. So I was thinking, I was like, I just read this really long book. He barely even got into the things I wanted him to talk about, and he spent a lot of time talking about like this girl that he's super into, which I get. He's a young guy. He's also telling a story.
Yeah.
You can do that, but like don't make it like a theme of entire chapters. Jesus.
One of the podcasts where the author was talking, and one of the things that he said is that virtually everyone who's willing to give him critical feedback hates a particular section of the story. And they all say something like, oh, it's a fantastic book except for so-and-so. And so everyone picks a different part, though. It's like whether or not it's the romantic story, or like the Edema Rue section, or the time he's living as a homeless person in the city. And like everyone just picks a different part to hate on.
I do like that, like that's like a thing, because, there are so many different aspects of the book that people could dislike different sections.
Yeah.
There were two things, I guess. The first one was the love interest. It felt like somebody else wrote those chapters. It didn't feel like the same style. I was more interested in this guy's other life, and if you're going to have like a romantic interest, I just wish it was different. I read it too long ago to like give you specifics, but I remember reading it when it come to a chapter where he was going to be like mooning over this girl for the entire fucking chapter.
Yeah.
Just mix it in with other things. This girl's going to be part of your life. Just intertwine it. I think at some point he talks for pages about how he was looking around for her in the city, and it was like, holy shit, I don't care how many places you went. I think he didn't even find her in the end of this. Like, you went back to his house, and like the had like done something to his window or something.
Yeah.
But like he spent so much time talking about how he couldn't find her. I get that you like this character. We know at this point how like you're into this character for almost no reason really, because you haven't really given us a reason to even like her.
Oh man.
There's like something else too, like that homeless lady that always like helped out with.
Yeah.
Like I thought that was kind of thrown in there kind of weirdly, but
Homeless lady.
like he would like help this lady who lived in the sewer. Then like the boiling shit fell over and he had to go rescue her. I remember thinking that was like the character was almost like you didn't even need the character to exist. And the last thing is he alludes to something in the beginning about how to be able to fight dragons. And in the end he fights like this like super lazy non-dragon thing. And I remember thinking that was so anticlimactic. This is not a climax, not even a fight. You guys are sitting in a tree looking at this animal that doesn't do anything. I'm glad you found out the knowledge of how to do this like 500 pages ago, but just tying these two individual scenes together is not enough to have this in this book.
I feel like somebody just watched Gone with the Wind and was expecting to have seen The Terminator.
What?
And was really disappointed when there was very few robots and explosions in Gone with the Wind. Like this.
Why? That's not even good for this. I want to see why you would think that's like related to this argument.
So the biggest reason I'm saying that, aside from the fact you called Ari a homeless girl, like you realize she's one of the most popular characters in this fucking book. Like there's an entire other book about this character that everyone seems to love. I didn't like it, but that's here nor there. Like this is
I like how you're promoting this book like it's this main thing and you're going to end it with I didn't like it.
Like I personally didn't like it, but I acknowledge it is a massively famous book. It's also very unique. We can talk about that later, but that's called the Slow Regard for Silent Things. And it's not part of the storyline, but it does follow Ari around.
It's a cool name though.
No, but when you described him seeking out Diana or Diane, I can't remember which one.
Deanna, change her name. Her name like changes every 5 seconds.
But when he's seeking out Diana in the beginning, and you're talking about how he's just running around the town and comes back to find a note, and like that's the end of that segment of the story. Like I remember that part, and it's like heartbreakingly tragic because he's looking for her. He gets into trouble and like fucks his life up looking for this girl and comes back to find out she'd already been gone looking for him and left a note at his door that he could have seen weeks ago and saved himself all of that fucking hassle. Like basically this book is the book about Quoth getting his life fucked up over and over again in a myriad of ways, and it's like beautiful and tragic and just fucking heartbreaking. And the way you're talking about it, like I can't even fathom. Like that's what I mean. Like you want these very simple, enjoyable little aspects. If you want to read Stephen King, he's got about 100 books, and all of them have people dying and yelling at each other and doing really dramatic things.
That's not what I want.
It is, because you
No,
just
it's
called the
not.
Draccus an anticlimactic ending. Like the whole point was it was anticlimactic because legends aren't what they are made out to be. Like this
Ugh.
whole theme throughout the
Derick.
book is that there are names and expectations and myths and like stories. The whole book is about stories, and one of them is about a dragon, and it gets blown up, and you're mad because somebody. Oh man, it's.
This is fun.
It's supposed to be anticlimactic because stories get told like that and blown out of proportion, and you can't believe what you hear. Like, it's not a lesson, but it's a theme. Like, it's still carrying throughout. And I think I'm probably making static in this stupid recording. But
Are you so angry you're like electricity is coming off of you now?
I should have known that would happen. This is my all-time favorite books. There's no impartial way I can talk to you about it.
I find this to be really hilarious. Like, okay, for one, I do feel like when I finished the book, I feel like I missed some points of it because I was reading it as though I often forgot Wilt was telling his own story, and it is like a story about his legend.
Yeah, it's a story about stories.
I both got that and kind of didn't. And I feel like I may have misinterpreted or just got tired of him searching around for Deanne or whatever her name is. Dina, pick anything with an A at the end and an E sound ends there. But I did seem to miss the point of, well, him running around and like fucking his life up for this stupid girl that like is, I don't know, all kinds of fucked up, man. You just gotta like not hang out with people who are like a million kinds of fucked up. But I do feel like I'm still gonna be in support of the Draccus being like, I see why it's just a story, and like I see what you're saying where it's like he didn't actually fight a dragon and stuff, but in terms of being the person who is listening to these stories and reading this and also being aware that this is a novel,
Yeah.
it needs to still follow at least a vague pattern.
Mhm.
This is more what annoyed me about the dragon thing. Was not that he didn't fight a dragon or people didn't die. Like, I don't even want death because I found his tales of Quoth's life in general to be like really awesome. It was pretty cool. This character seems like a really cool life. The legend is spiraled out of control until he becomes this magical being, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I remember reading in the very beginning when he talks about how to get rid of the Draccus or whatever. I remember reading it and being like, this is going to come into play later on in the book, and I bet it's going to be annoying to me because it's so minor. Yeah, he's fighting something, but this was just, he was hanging out with that stupid girl. He's finally hanging out with her. Not even, now they're like not doing, I think they're like chewing gum or something. Like it ended up being just so, nothing was happening in this scene. And like, it was the end of the book. So like, not only, I think it was a combination of things where I was disappointed the book was ending, that then all those stories hadn't been told yet. And then my final big scene in the book is you stumbling across this thing that's kind of like a sloth that's just giant. Like, this is what my last scene is. I think I was just disappointed because I wanted it to be at least a little bit of excitement, and it pissed me off that I was right about that foreshadowing in the beginning that that was going to be important. Because it's like 2 sentences in the beginning of the book, and it causes the end scene to happen because he happened to read about Draccus's when he was 12. That just, it was too...
Yeah.
The Draccus wasn't known to be a big thing. Like, he is a writer, and it's a lot of different people reading this book. And when you were saying that those people came and like told him different parts that they would change, he could never make it satisfying for every single person. And it is overall a good story. I've been thinking about reading the second one for this trip.
If you were to re-listen to the first one at all, for any reason, I would say use the one that I'm about to load up in your iTunes.
Oh, you're giving me the one that's not Nick Podol.
Yeah, it's a different narrator named Fred Major. He died like 2 years after doing this, so that he wasn't able to record for the second one. But this is the version created for the Society for the Blind, and it's a bad recording. I'm going to start it off that way. It's not clear.
Okay.
You know, like most consistent sounds, you'll adjust to it and you just stop hearing it. But this guy makes up for it by being a fantastic fucking voice actor. He has different voices, he sounds good, he's got inflection in all the right places, and Nick Podell doesn't do any of that. He just kind of reads it like a textbook.
Because his voice isn't even like awesome either. Like, it's not terrible, but I feel like there are other voice actors who I feel like that was a bad choice for such a long book.
Yeah, a bad voice actor can ruin it. I was going to argue that the Draccus makes more sense than you're giving it credit for, and despite the fact that it was only briefly mentioned, kind of, actually I think is an underhanded play for all the right reasons. Like, he basically was making this comment about a Draccus that he had read about when he was little, that he knew very little about, and in the end, it's very purposefully this anticlimactic monster that is basically a big sloth that eats trees and shit. And it's like a nice parallel for Quoth, because he has so many legends surrounding him, some that he's created himself and some that others have told. And everybody's kind of built him up into this mythical beast. But at this point, he's a pretty average guy, and if anybody were to have heard all of those legends and to have met him, it would be identical to just seeing the Draccus after expecting a dragon.
You know what? That's really well put, Derick.
Thank you.
I like that, and I think that makes pretty good sense. I do think that we are forgetting that this guy is supposed to be like, well, my impression was that this guy is like fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
He's not just a regular guy. Like, if he looks like a regular human when you see him, but that's one thing I think of, like, that I both like and dislike about this book. It's both that the character of Quoth, the legend of Quoth, is this, like, obviously that's going to be overblown. But in his own telling, which he is telling about himself, even if you cut out some of like the more like arrogant, braggadocious stuff that he's doing, there's no way this guy's like a dummy.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Like, it's not exactly a perfect parallel, but I feel like that was kind of what he intended, rather than making it out to be a dramatic scene that was purposefully anticlimactic just to fuck with you. I feel like, unfortunately, I feel like the second book is going to be even more of a letdown for you.
Why?
Because he doesn't answer a lot of different things that people wanted to have answered. And this is why, like, nobody really believes that he's going to finish up in one book. Despite the fact that these books are enormous. I think he mentioned before in one of his blog posts, because a lot of people have been bitching at him and Finish, he's like, just to let you guys know, my last book was bigger than all 3 of the Fellowship of the Ring series combined. Like, it's a big book, and that's why there's so many different aspects to it, so... But even still, like, having said that, he's written 2,000 pages now, and delivered on almost, I don't know, 10% of all the things he's talked about in the very beginning.
See, that's what bothered me in the first one, because it sounds like some cool shit that's going on. You get to the end, you're like, you're still in school, kid. You haven't even left school yet. He's like a young kid in school, too, like a child prodigy style.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm remembering a lot of this book now that we're talking about it. I haven't thought about this book in months.
I'm impressed, yeah. I'm surprised considering even if you didn't like certain aspects of it, that would still stand out for you.
Well, I did really like it. Looking back, I wasn't as into it in the very beginning. I think I liked the character Ben, but then he like died or left or something.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I was like, this guy's a cool character. Why are they getting rid of him so soon? But then like they moved on. But now that I'm remembering how much I was really enjoying it towards the end, I might give it another shot. But I am a little worried now that I'm not awesome with retaining details for certain things. Like, and if you miss something or missed a theme, like I obviously missed some themes in this book, so I feel like I'm a little concerned about starting the second one. I mean, then again, like, it won't be perfect to read it.
He doesn't recap heavily either. I'd say this book might recap some of the prime objectives, but usually in a very tasteful and short way.
Well, this one will be good because sitting here thinking about possibly rereading that first book just so I can read the second book, that is the most laughable concept ever. I can barely finish the books I'm reading as it is, and I want to read 800 pages just so I can read another 1,000 pages? Like, Mari, come on, let's be realistic about like how you actually live your life.